Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Just who will Tyson Fury face next? Frank Warren, his co-promoter, has given an indication that it's going to be, as he puts it, a top 5 fighter. So that is something that we've actually heard before, ahead of the Tom Schwarz fight being confirmed. And because Warren had said top 5 previously, no one expected it was ultimately going to be Schwarz. But he did meet the criteria loosely because he was number 2 in the WBO rankings. And effectively, that's the way that they sold him as a credible opponent, a guy who was number 2 in the rankings in the WBO, but also unbeaten. And I think from what we've seen, and even Frank Warren is saying, it's got to be a step up from Tom Schwarz, that it has to be someone halfway credible. It's got to be a halfway decent name. It can't be another low-tier opponent as Tom Schwarz was. It's got to be something in between that and then going to Deontay Wilder, which is going to be potentially Tyson Fury's first fight of 2020. They're looking for a rematch between Wilder and Fury, potentially happening sometime between February and April. Although Bob Arum has made some comments to Helen News Sports suggesting that maybe no interim fights are needed for either, that they could just do the rematch next, and he'd like to see it because there could be some nervous moments for both if they do have interim fights. But for the moment, there is an interim fight on the horizon. They're talking September 21st and October 5th. I believe they're saying it would be in New York. So Frank Warren telling Press Association Sport, it will be someone who's ranked in the top 5, a step up from Schwarz. Whoever it is will be selected with half an eye to Wilder. The next opponent hasn't got to be exactly similar to Wilder, but I don't want to make the adaptation to somebody who's short, then back to somebody tall again. There were elements I liked in there, in brackets against Schwarz. Tyson was just looking for something a little bit too much. Frank Warren's statements. So maybe he didn't like everything that he saw, but it was a highly effective performance against an overmatched opponent. He was able to do absolutely everything that he wanted in there. But the crux of a statement, top 5 fighter, top 5 opponent, is going to be this interim fight either in September or October in New York. It actually doesn't leave much scope for who it could actually be. But I want to first start off, before I get to some of the rankings, to sort of either rule in or rule out who it could be, address one of the names that sort of popped up. And this was during a fight weekend. And Jarrell Miller, his name was mentioned with Tyson Fury quite a bit. And part of that came about because Jarrell Miller was in Las Vegas. He's in a process right now where he's trying to rehabilitate his image after 3 failed doping tests back in that was announced in April and led to his fight with Anthony Joshua being cancelled. Miller is currently on a ban from the WBA. He's out of their rankings for 6 months. He has to do some VADA testing, and he's been dropped from the WBA and the WBO rankings. So in terms of Miller, could it be him? Well, there's some things that are in his favour, but then there's also the whole elephant in the room of these failed recent tests. I mean, if it was 2 years ago, I think that's one of those things that would have faded from people's memories, but it's still relatively fresh. I mean, I don't think people are as outraged now, but it's still 3 different substances that were found in his body, and some of the half-cooked statements that he's been coming out with, trying to sort of explain away why it was in his body, don't seem that credible. At the end of this one, I'll put up my sort of take on the video that I did on my take on his reasoning, and as he called it, and it was an accident. But anyway, Miller, he actually does tick some of the boxes that you might want for an interim fight ahead of Deontay Wilder. He's American for one. He's got some profile. He's unbeaten. And he would really sell a fight. That's the sort of guy that you could have helping sell the fight, building Tyson Fury up if he went in there and beat Jarrell Miller. It could work on many fronts. It would have worked with Anthony Joshua. He'd done a good job to sort of talk his way into that fight and ultimately helping sell the event for June 1st ahead of all those failed tests, which ultimately sort of, he slipped up, messed up, and out of the rankings, out of contention for a title. and now he's trying to rehabilitate his image. And that's what part of his trip to Las Vegas being there. I mean, sure, he was there for the boxing and to watch the fight and all that, but that was one of the biggest stages where he could have been pushing himself, pushing his profile, get in front of a lot of the world's boxing media, get his face out there. He's been doing numerous interviews. He's really trying to get past what happened a couple of months ago. And I think to a limited degree, he's been successful. His name is connected to Tyson Fury's now, but he doesn't meet some of the criteria. This is some of the downside now, because Frank Warren says it's going to be a top 5 guy. Jarrell Miller has 0 rankings. Even before the failed test, he wasn't ranked in the WBC because he wouldn't sign up to the clean boxing program. The IBF, it didn't rank him because he turned down an eliminator with Kubrat Pulev in the middle of last year. So he was in 2 rankings, which he was dumped from, WBA and WBO. He can only get back into the WBA rankings after his 6 months out of it is up. And that's, I believe, in September. So could he make the fight? Potentially. But, he's not ranked. It wouldn't really meet some of the criteria. I think some of this is him being leveraging off the occasion for his own purposes to try get fans to get past and forget what he's done. In terms of the actual ranking, so see here on screen. So if we're talking top 5, this is the WBC. Dillian Whyte. So should he get past Oscar Rivas on July 20? Well, could he make a fight for September or October? Potentially. But then other things like promotional considerations come into it. Are they going to help out ESPN and Top Rank by sending Dillian Whyte over to the United States? And you would think that sort of fight would make more sense in the United Kingdom anyway, but we definitely know this will be a United States-based fight for Fury. At number 2 in the WBC rankings, well, it's Tyson Fury. He can't fight himself. Anthony Joshua is going to be tied up. He's at number 3 in a rematch with Andy Ruiz Jr. Luis Ortiz is tied up in his own rematch with Deontay Wilder, so it's not going to be him. Adam Kovnatski is at number 5, and my initial sort of thinking on this is, no, I don't think that PBC would look to sort of foist him into sort of a fight, especially after his fight is in early August against Chris Arreola. And it does appear that he's been a guy that's been groomed for an eventual title shot, that they're having him in reserve on the shelf, ready to roll, should needs require him to get in with the likes of Deontay Wilder. There had been, some thinking from fans and commentators alike that after Luis Ortiz, potentially, if there wasn't a Tyson Fury rematch or if there was a big enough gap, that Kovnatski would be the natural next opponent for Deontay Wilder after Ortiz. But it seems to be now Ortiz and Tyson Fury, and Kovnatski is out in the cold. But I think they will want to just keep him ticking over until the time that they want to have a title shot with, whoever has the belt. They want to have some top heavyweights in the PBC stable vying for titles. We probably shouldn't go past number 5 because Frank Warren's given us the criteria there. If we go to the WBO, well, it's number 1, Dillian Whyte. At the moment, it's Tom Schwartz, so that could change, and someone's obviously going to come into the top 5 in lieu of Schwartz, who'll drop down. Fury at number 3. Oscar Rivas is at number 4. He has a fight with Dillian Whyte on July 20. Maybe he could be ready for a fight against Tyson Fury, but it sort of goes back to some of those comments from Frank Warren. They don't want to go from a tall guy to a smaller heavyweight, and Rivas definitely fits in that category at about 6 foot, so it would seem unlikely. Zhili Zhang. Well, he's a big southpaw. That could be interesting, but he's just signed on with Matchroom in a co-promotional deal. I can't see it happening. If we get to the WBA rankings, and before I get to the top 5 here, we actually have, you can see here, the WBA regular title holder is Mahmoud Shah, formerly known as Manuel Shah. He is going to be facing the number 1 contender in the WBA rankings, which is Trevor Bryan, who's actually an interim champion. They're going to be having a unification of sorts. Hasn't been announced the date that's going to happen, but probably sometime in July-ish. They've meant to have announced that by now, but that should be coming out shortly. The winner of that fight potentially could be in line, but bear in mind, so Manuel Shah, he has obviously been gagging to fight Tyson Fury, get on the big stage, so he'd need to get past Bryan. But given given he hasn't fought since November 2017, how realistic is he going to have this if he beats Bryan? And that's a big if. Can he get past him and then have another fight within a couple of months? Given the inactivity, and, I just don't know if it could be possible. But I don't know if he actually wins that fight against Bryan. And Bryan, for his part, he's been out of the ring since he won his interim title, the best part of 9 or 10 months ago. So both guys very inactive. Trevor Bryan is, I believe, a Dong King fighter. And if that being the case, and we just saw Joseph Parker's fight with Eric Molina, another Dong King fighter, fall over because of money and other factors, would they be able to get a deal done with Trevor Bryan in time to fight in, late September or early October? Not convinced. Alexander Usyk, well, that's not going to be happening. He will have his first fight at heavyweight. That will be in September. Fraser Kendo, well, I don't think that's a goer, and I'm not sure that would, Tom Schwartz, that was bad enough, but Fraser Kendo would be really scraping down to the bottom of the barrel and then scraping through and then going about 60 feet down. He is, 46, 47 now, hasn't fought since 2014. He's only there courtesy of he's owed a title shot, and that hasn't quite come for all manner of reasons. He was meant to actually fight Mahmoud Shah, but for whatever reason that fell over. A number of times they couldn't get purse bids done, and date and times it all slipped, and then there was that sort of drug situation with Shah. But now Shah is going to be fighting Bryan. So Fraser Kendo, who knows what's going to happen with him. Dillian White, already been through that. Andy Ruiz Jr., well, he's going to be in the rematch with Joshua, as we know. So then we go to the IBF rankings. And there's been some talk that Kubrat Pulev, you can see here, number 1, that maybe he would be the guy they would look to feed Pulev to Tyson Fury in a couple of months. I just can't see that happening. I'm pretty convinced that Kubrat Pulev is going to maintain his position so he can fight for the IBF title. I think that's the way he's going to do it. And remember, at the point that he faces whoever's got the IBF title, it's likely the other belts, because Andy Ruiz has 3 titles, the IBF, WBA and WBO. They are all with him at the moment, on the line for the rematch. In the next year or so, Pulev will get a guaranteed title shot. Does he want to potentially end up being a sacrificial lamb on Tyson Fury's comeback? I'm not convinced that he would want to sign on to that, because he may have his own, bigger fish to fry situation. Number 2 is not rated. That is common with the IBF, so it can't be that guy. And number 3, Ajit Cabello. This is interesting. I actually think that maybe he could end up being a front runner. He is a stablemate of Tom Schwartz, and remember, Tom Schwartz is with SES. They got the deal done for him. If it's a top 5 guy, Ajit Cabello meets the criteria through his ranking in the IBF. He is a very good heavyweight, had a very good win over Derek Chisora, been a little bit inactive since, but he is a guy who's legitimately out of the top 15 in the world. He is inside that territory. So he's number 3 here in the IBF. And that would be, he's about 6'3", 6'3 and a half. He's a very good boxer, very technical. It would be a very different sort of fight than the Tom Schwartz one. Cabello would be coming to win, that's for sure. He's got much more about him than Tom Schwartz. So I really rate Cabello, and I think that would be a decent fight and potentially makeable. Adam Kovnatsky, it's unlikely. And Robert Helenius, well, he's got a fight coming up in, July against Gerald Washington. So I don't know if Helenius would, the turnaround, that sort of thing. He's pretty injury prone. He'll probably break his hand against Washington. Not sure that Helenius, and maybe he's seen better days. I like the option of a guy like Ajit Cabello just because he's a young, up-and-coming contender, solid record, a couple of decent wins on it. Robert Helenius is almost from that former generation, like guys like Derek Chisora, for example, that have been around forever and a day. But the last thing that I wanted to do was just quickly sort of flick through the box rec, sort of top 15 or so. Is there anyone that we've missed here that could end up potentially being an opponent for Fury? We've already sort of been through the main guys that it wouldn't be. Ruiz Jr., he's booked up. Deontay Wilder, well, that's not this fight, it'll be the next one. Joshua's booked up. Tyson Fury's at 4th. Alexander Povetkin, That's an outside possibility, but because of some of those statements from Warren about, a smaller fighter, that he doesn't want to go from big to small back to big, maybe that just rules him out. I think Povetkin, that'd be a good fight, but maybe that was a fight that maybe we should have seen a few years ago. Been through Dillian Whyte, Jarrell Miller options, Luis Ortiz tied up, Kubrat Pulev. That's a possibility, but I think he's going to hang on to it. Joseph Parker, unlikely given that he's just signed on to a Matchroom deal for 3 fights. Adam Kovnatsky, been through him. Dominic Brazil, no, that's not happening. Christian Hammer, well, we've been there, done that, got the postcard. Tyson Fury obliterated Hammer, really put a beat down on him, about 4 or 5 years ago. Oscar Rivas, we've covered that. Filip Hrgovic, unlikely just because he's still a bit green, but he's also on a Matchroom co-promotional deal. And you go through down even the next list of 5 names, there's no one there that automatically sort of stands out, even in the next 10. So if I had to hazard a guess at this point in time, well, the winner of the Char and Bryan fight, and maybe Ajit Kabayel, I think Kabayel could be a front runner. I'm not sure that the Pulev situation happens unless he gets massively overpaid. What about you? What do you make of it all? Drop a comment loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.